How are we looking, guys?
You're looking right, you're not listening. Okay, they're listening.
Should have.
But can we record it? It's just streaming. Because I think that the recording is probably supersede the streaming.
You're not just using it trying to get mics. See what's going on.
Oh yeah, have you? It does.
It works.
It's working.
Can you see the presentation on the laptop as well as just the presentation.
Oh, can you see it on the laptop? Yeah.
Can you do it present a view on the laptop?
Yeah.
Just kind of standing in the way of the projection by standing behind this table.
So yeah, we'll move the table.
And then
Ben,
on
can we move the table?
because the thing about playing out viewing is you can start to know what's being shown.
Yeah. So it comes down here.
Oh, I see.
I think we just shift it a little bit. That should be fine. And then you can have it. Yeah, we can flip it.
Shall we?
It would be nice to have a quick check to make sure this is working.
Yeah. You try to do that and I'll just fertility and Oxford, I'll go out and hand them out. Yeah, that's good, yeah. Giving back to the community. Can't.
I just ran Overheating's house.
Paul says they're recording more than most.
This is directional. You'll pick on last week and you'll pick Before we go, yeah, well, we think how we can respond to it sounds okay. It's what about that? Do you just want to deal with that side of things? Put the top of the chair.
So at the minute though, he had background chassis.
Yeah.
So we've got a message summary, so
So you're happy with start getting people in, Ben? talk us through, Ben and Holly?
Yeah.
Yeah?
So just 100% that one.
What's the entire thing?
There you go, it's all straight.
There you go. Sit down.
I would touch this. Thank you. Yeah. Ben? That's okay, isn't it? It's got some volume. I mean, we've already got probably the 3 tables that are going to be full anyway. Probably don't need this.
We'll leave it more. So, presentation.
Yeah.
We're going to go see that on the screen here, aren't we? On the screen, let's see that.
Yeah, so we've got
That one, is that going to be?
I mean, we can zoom out for more like this, but I'd rather get more of them, and then you can just switch it.
And that will do that on the scene, is that right?
We've got quite a few spare seats, so if you want to bring yourself forward, that would be great with this. Oh, we can put the aircon on. Put the aircon in there.
Because if you're going to be walking around, that's a problem.
I'll do that, and then that's a little bit more, right? And then you're literally just doing kind of, like if you're following it.
Right, so good morning everyone. Thank you for coming along to our very first CPD event. I'll just start with a joke, but I look at some architect jokes and they're not very flattering, so I kind of decided that wouldn't be a good idea. But we've got a few other people just waiting to come in, but we'll start anyway. So sorry for the apologies, just the usual kind of technical issues, but we've got that sorted now. I want to thank you for making an effort to come today. I want to thank Sam Tuck from Bloomberg, UK. They sponsored this event, and so if you don't know much about them, they're the global player in ventilation. Sam will be up on stage later to chat about his projects. Just for introductions, my name is Paul Sellers. I'm CEO of Karma. We've got George Edward over there, Wave. He's the COO. We've got Ben Franklin at the desk. He's co-founder and director. We've got Peter Duckett over here, our estimator, and we've got Julian over there, who is the construction director. Between us, we've got about 150 years of construction experience, when you add it all up, and we've got history of working with tier 1 and tier 2 contracts. So a little bit about Callow, if you don't know much about us. We started up just over 5 years ago with Ben and Phil Taylor, our chairman, who's based out in Australia. Started off with the usual bathrooms and kitchen installs, moved on to extensions and house refurbishments, and then we've become very active in the sort of high-end residential market. Built up quite a good track record, and you see some of our projects in the brochures, or jump online and have a look at the websites. We'll be around afterwards. We're in the kind of orange and black t-shirts, and you can have a chat with us after that. Here's the run through on the screen. So we've got obviously arrival, breakfast, tea and coffee, which we've done. We're slightly behind schedule, but we'll have our first speaker, will be Dr. Joel Callow from Beyond Carbon. We'll have a Q&A session. Then we'll have a materials and innovation showcase, which will be Sam. Stop for tea and coffee again, and then we'll jump back on with Ben and Dave Buxton from Q2 Consulting, and then there'll be another Q&A session, and then we'll close, hopefully end about 11:30ish. So that's the run through. Also, we're slightly behind schedule, so please ignore the times, but we'll try and catch back up if we can. So the reason we decided to put on a CPD event is because it gives us an opportunity to put you architects and other trades in a room together to network, develop and rekindle work relations. I'm sure some of you know each other from past projects or other CPD events. And also it's an opportunity for you to have some free food and coffee. You know, a lot of the architects don't get out very often, so it's an opportunity for you to sort of see some daylight and meet up with people. But also it's an opportunity to discuss certain topics that we think are important, and hopefully you do too as well. We want to bring value to the architects in our community because we appreciate what you do. Some architects will see a project from start to finish, they'll design it, they'll be part of it, and they'll see the end product. Other architects, due to client constraints, don't get a chance to do that. So often the builders and contractors are the takers, the winners in this kind of process. But we want to try and change that and create more of an all-around kind of team ethic. We also have the opportunity to get to know you as well. So we know some of the architects here we've worked before in the past, and there's many we haven't, but we'd like to get to know you and your team. So please take a look at our website and just chat to us if you've got any upcoming projects. Then we'd love to be able to help and chat to you through them as well. So it's worth noting that we don't just do high residential. We obviously did what we started as well with smaller projects, the bread and butter of our work as well. But we do have do projects in other sectors as well, and we're pretty competitive. So our sweet spot is sort of £1 to £10 million projects, but we also do the smaller stuff as well. So this event hopefully gives the opportunity to discuss certain topics that we think are important right now in the construction trade. So we've got Dr. Joel Callow from Beyond Carbon, who are based in Buxton. They're very passionate about the environment, and they work, they like to work on projects that meet the environmental standards, the high standards that they can really. We at Callow have had the pleasure of doing some projects at Enefit and Passivhaus. The first one we started about 3 years ago. We didn't really know a huge amount about it. We kind of just learned on the go. But our last one, which is Fir Tree, I think it's on the top of the brochure, which is Passivhaus. We kind of understood, kind of got the concept, the idea of what we're trying to achieve. We see the importance that and benefits to the client and the environment, and so we want to create a sustainable future for now and for future generations. So if you could give Joel a warm welcome as he comes up to present. Thank you very much, Joel.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Just checking that everyone's getting audio through, and is the live stream happy? And while the digital people who didn't quite make it into the room, I can tell the digital folk that the bacon buttons were delicious. Sorry you missed them. And those of us in the room are all smiling happily with our full bacon butty tummies. Okay, so I've got about 25 minutes to rattle through what is Passivhaus and why should we do it in the UK construction market. And there's lots of stuff to cover, so I'm going to be fairly fast. The dilemma maybe is, can we afford to do it? And if we can afford to do it, should we do it? I'm going to go bust some myths initially that will hopefully unpack the answers to those kinds of questions, and also talk into the challenges for architects of very high performance building design standards like Passivhaus. So without further ado, let's bust some myths together. I've got 5 myths. I'll give you 5 on screen, and I'm going to try and explain why each of these is a misconception about Passivhaus and what the truth is, hopefully a more positive truth than the myths. So we're going to do the dance this morning. So number 1, is Passivhaus too expensive to really be a mainstream solution to the environment issues we face, the climate crisis, ecological crisis, and the like? Is it just simply impractically expensive or not? So number 1 myth. Well, if you read the 2019 Passivhaus Structure Report on cost, you might conclude yes. Actually, the Passivhaus standard, brilliant as it is, a global standard, probably the foremost and most difficult performance energy standard, this is operational energy, is too expensive to do in bulk en masse. The report concluded numbers in the region of, let's get this right, around 4% once adopted at scale. This is 4% extra capital cost, and initially something like 10%. And if any of you had the pleasure of looking through the profit and loss figures for developments, that would probably kill quite a lot of developments, certainly in London and probably elsewhere as well. So 4% sounds like, oh great, we've got down to 4, but if that were true, then it would not be a widespread and adoptable standard, because we wouldn't be able to build the buildings we currently need to. Certainly 1.5 million homes coming our way in the next few years, fingers crossed. Thankfully, that 4% at the time was a prediction of what they thought a future number might look like, and it was far too high. So it's worth saying this applies, the larger scale the project, the lower the number. So if you build 500 homes, that number is probably sub-zero. If you build 1 home, then it's probably higher than 4%, and that person will be building a house because they want the best house for themselves. That's fine, that's a great investment. I still recommend it, but it won't be 0 cost, it will be a cost. So the bigger the better, and at scale, the number isn't 4%, it's almost certainly 0 or lower, so a cost saving. So bizarrely, Passivhaus might be cheaper to construct than not Passivhaus, depending on the context and scale of your project. Vis-a-vis Barratt Homes. So Barratt don't do things unless they can afford to. That's how you get to be a FTSE 100 successful house builder, and they have adopted Passivhaus certified en masse for every London project from this point onwards, starting with a project I'll show you in a moment. So if Barratt can do it at reasonable cost, then so can everybody else. Number 2, Passivhaus is just too hard. Now that's a fair comment. Passivhaus is hard. There are reasons why it is still the right thing to do. It's not too hard, but it is challenging. There are challenging areas around supply chain. So even if the main contractor says, yeah, I can do Passivhaus, they've still got to convince every single supply chain provider that relates to Passivhaus, particularly air tightness, thermal continuity, quality and so on, windows, the whole shebang. Each supply chain partner has to also come along for the journey. That's challenging, it's really hard. So it is hard. Is it too hard? No, not really. Our day job, my whole company, what we do is we deliver Passivhaus at almost every scale you can imagine. So we work with tier 1 contractors designing laboratories, we do multi-resi in London, we do everything else in between as well. And the truth of it is, every person we've worked with has ultimately agreed they can deliver Passivhaus, but they did find it hard the first time. So first project, really challenging, Paul kind of said that already, worthwhile, but hard work, the learning experience. Project 2, project 3, project 4, it starts to roll very, very smoothly and people really enjoy doing it. So it's basically a quality standard, not an energy standard in effect. The energy outcome is because the quality is very high. So what you're really saying is, would I like to build quality buildings or not? Is it too hard to build quality? The answer is no. We're a really fantastic industry, and when we're set a challenge, we rise to it. So I would say, no, it's not too hard. It's hard enough to be worth the challenge and to do the job right, and not to give up and say, too difficult? No, of course not. We can do it. Okay, number 3, it's not needed. Why would we bother doing Passivhaus? And I would say, if it isn't needed, let's please not do it, because it is quite challenging and hard. I love it, I think it's a great standard, but the reason I love it is because I think it's necessary. So if I can convince you guys that we should be doing it, then I've done my job well today. So why do we need it? Well, there's probably 2 principal reasons, I think they're both on screen here. Okay, first of all, I sometimes hear in the specialist built environment press, we've got operational energy all sorted out. Our buildings are low energy, are fantastic. Part L's been pushing down on U values for years. It's all tickety-boo, low heating bills, etc., etc. Job done. I'm a bit worried about embodied carbon. Crikey, that concrete's high embodied carbon in my project. You know, that's my big concern. Operational carbon, it's history. We did that. That's all sorted. If that were true, I would happily resign my postdoc on carbon and go and do something else with my life that was more worthwhile. It's not true at all. The exact opposite is true. Part L has been terrible for operational energy and is a really faulty energy standard. And the energy gap between what the likes of me say is going to happen when we do our energy calcs, or our SAP calcs, or whatever it is, and what actually happens when the homeowner or occupant of the building gets cracking with their heating and cooling and everything else, the gap is absolutely phenomenal. So far from having solved operational energy, it remains as big a problem as it ever was. And worse than that, as we try and decarbonise our country, now whatever your position is on net zero, we are heading there in some form as a nation, and hopefully as a planet too. If we have very wasteful buildings on our national grid, and then we insist to electrify them, which we ought to, the grid gets bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more expensive, and more high carbon to construct. More and more solar panels are required for the wasteful buildings we're constructing. So in a world where the national grid is not infinitely large, and we can't just switch on another power station to cover the load, in that world, we need our buildings to plug in at the lowest possible energy draw that they can achieve. So we are actually contributing to a national movement of energy security, energy independence, and zero carbon when we construct low energy buildings, and the opposite is also true. So you want to ask yourself, what I'm building and doing in my job, am I contributing to this future I'm imagining where we're secure and zero carbon, or am I detracting from it by building wasteful products that consume too much energy? Think gas guzzler versus hybrid eco-car or something of that kind. Okay, so it's very much needed. Second point, very quickly, climate resilience. And I'm going to come on to a bit more of this in the next couple of myths. We need our buildings to operate well regardless of what happens to our weather and our climate over the next few decades. Passivhaus is uniquely resilient to high and low temperatures. So heat waves, sorted. Cold snaps, also sorted. The inside of the building stays stable, comfortable, and safe for its occupants, regardless of what's going on outside of the building. So really critical point, climate resilience. Which brings me on to overheating. And now, if we don't design buildings that are capable of managing heat waves, we're going to have some nasty surprises in the coming years, because we've already had a really solid heat wave in 2022. That was the first time we got over 40 degrees in the UK in the history of humans, by the way. That's not in the last century or in the last 500 years. That's since there were humans that could ever have experienced those temperatures in Britain, there has not been a 40-degree summer that scientists are aware of. So first time in human history, 2022, 40 degrees. Now if that was a one-off, we can all breathe a sigh of relief, get back to business as usual, happy days. Unfortunately it wasn't, and we're finding rolling heat waves are going to come our way. In fact, indeed, this summer has been, well, not as bad as 2022, but definitely in the same direction. And on the continent in Europe, it's been at least as bad. So our buildings need to be heat wave resilient. Do passive houses overheat? This is an accusation I get levelled. The answer is no, and in fact the opposite is true. If you build a passive house correctly, it will always be cooler and more comfortable in a heat wave than the building next door that is not passive house. You can do it badly, probably. I mean, with a bit of effort, you could do a bad passive house, but you shouldn't need to, and if you don't, you'll get a resilient building that stays the right temperature. So far from being a problem for heat waves, it is a solution to heat waves. And the stuff we're doing in London, which I'll come on to in a moment, is one of the reasons we're doing that is because London is the hottest part of the UK due to the heat island effect, and so the buildings there need to be even more resilient than they might be in, say, the Oxfordshire countryside. It still matters here, but it matters even more in London. Okay, final one, airtightness. Those of you involved, if you've ever been on the tools or are in construction itself as opposed to the design side of all of this, will be saying, yeah, that's all very well and good job, but I know about Passive House, I know that. It has this crazy, difficult airtightness standard that's 5 times worse than building regs. Are you really telling me we can deliver that on every project? And the answer is yes, I am telling you that we can. So airtightness is rightly recognised as a significant jump up. So in some of the other areas, Passivhaus is a tweak or a tune or a bit of an improvement on the normal. On airtightness, it is a step change better. So it is 5 to 10 times more airtight than a typical UK building. However, if you design and construct for airtightness, as opposed to treating it as an add-on that you sort of ignore because it's quite easy, funnily enough, you can improve the airtightness by a factor of 10 quite comfortably. And there are some innovations that we're seeing in the market today that are making that step change, that tenfold step change, somewhat less painful and more achievable. So again, it comes down to quality. Airtightness is simply how big are the holes in your building. So ask yourself, how many holes would I like? And the answer ought to be none, okay? We don't say about water tightness, well, let's try and make it relatively watertight. But if there's a bit of leakage in heavy rain, that's okay. No, we say it is 100% watertight. There will be no leaks under any circumstances. So if we can do that for water tightness, the air tightness is simply the same idea but applied to all 3 dimensions in the building as opposed to just the roof surface. So we don't compromise on issues of human health and well-being. We don't allow leaks to take place. Air tightness is the same. Really airtight buildings with proper ventilation are healthier and happier for the occupants with lower energy bills, lower levels of atmospheric pollutants inside the home, let's say, next to a busy road in London with PM 2.5s being emitted by the car tyres as they pass, even the EVs as well as the petrol engine cars. So how are we going to stop that? Well, we make the building very airtight and then we filter and ventilate carefully inside so that the person inside is not having an accumulation of rubber particulates causing them cancer in their lungs. They are breathing filtered, healthy air. But if we don't do that, they will be breathing those things. And that isn't just London either, that is also the Oxfordshire countryside. So we want healthy, happy humans, we need to build better, and air tightness is part of that. So again, quality is the key metric here. Okay, I'm going to do 3 or 4 slides on what is Passivhaus, having busted the myths, hopefully, and then I'll give you some project examples, and then we'll wrap up my part and move on to the next parts of the morning. So this is what a project team looks like for a UK construction project in the case where it's not Passivhaus. So all the usual suspects, critical professional people doing great jobs of what they're doing in their professional lives and together delivering complex building projects in the UK. That's what happens without Passivhaus. Let me swap to the next slide and I'll go back again in a minute as well. That's what it looks like when it's Passivhaus. You've got 3 new shiny yellow people. They're only yellow because Beyond Carbon's colour is yellow, by the way. They can be any colour you want. But I like yellow. 3 new people are in the mix. So let's just go back. Business as usual. Go forward. Passivhaus, and you've got 3 new yellow folk. And what you've got there is a whole load of people who are fixated, I would go as far as to say fanatical about quality. Okay? I employ and work with a great team of quality fanatics. Super nerds, if you like, whose job it is to fixate on the tiny details of quality that aggregate into a much, much, much better building at the end of the day, and to fight for those details through the long and slow and laborious process of design and construction, that at the end, the client gets exactly the thing they wanted at the start, which was a high quality building. Those 3 people, so that's the Passivhaus consultant, the Passivhaus certifier, third party verifier of what's going on, and then finally, beyond that, the Passivhaus Institute, who are the guardians of this high performance standard. All 3 of those work in a hierarchy. The consultant is the day-to-day person, that's my typical job on the project. My co-director Chris is a certifier. Our job is to make sure that the rest of the team have every piece of information, wisdom, technical knowledge, and everything else they need to deliver a better quality building. And I do that every day, all day, from RIBA stage 1 to 7+ and onwards, and every part in between. The certifier's job is to make sure that I do my job right so that the team has everything they need. So they're a verifier and a checker. And then finally, behind all that, the Institute will, from time to time, vet and check what we're doing to make sure we're not pulling the wool. So quality assurance requires levels of disclosure and honesty and transparency. And the only way to really get that is third-party reporting. If we say we've done something but nobody checks, from time to time we'll cut corners because it's a busy industry. Margins are tight, we're all under pressure. It would be naive to imagine we're going to deliver brilliant quality buildings without anybody ever checking us. Building control is supposed to perform that function, though arguably it doesn't. So the certifier is simply there to ensure we do the quality job we said we would do, and then sign it off as that quality job. If you do the quality job, there's nothing to be feared there. Why would you fear being checked by a person who's telling you you did the job you said you would do, well done, and gives you a big thumbs up and a certificate at the end? So certification for me is vital if we're going to get the quality levels dramatically upwards. Tenfold increase in airtightness, and then marginal tweaks everywhere else. Okay, 6 principles, I think. Passivhaus has 5 on the website, we've added a 6th. So super airtight buildings, fine. Windows are high performance in the UK, that means triple glazing and high performing frames as well. Ventilation, I'll jump to there. Ventilation is heat recovered in the winter. In the summer, it's cool recovered if the building has cooling, or it's opening windows if not. In building fabric, so the fabric first idea, we are minimising or removing thermal bridges. That's done carefully, not to cost extra money, but it is vital. So Part L is beginning to measure this a little, but often completely overlooks it. And when we get brought into, quote unquote, Passivhaus, a project that hasn't been designed this way, we are shocked often by the extent of the thermal bridging. It's easy peasy in a sense to get it right, as long as there's somebody in the room whose job it is to get it right and to fight for it step by step by step by step. If there's nobody there doing that, we default back to kind of medium to low performance detailing. It's not that hard to change, but you've got to want to and have the expertise in the room to do it. Insulation, you might be worried that we're talking about walls, yay thick with meters of insulation. Thankfully we're not in most cases, and I'll come on to a bit more of that in a moment. And then finally, primary energy, the total energy consumed by the building. Again, the regulation only measures regulated energy and ignores everything else. So typically on a non-domestic building, it ignores 2/3 of the energy loads and goes, I hope those work out for you, and it focuses on just 1/3 of them. Passivhaus says, no, it doesn't matter what the load is. If it comes in through the meter, it's a part of the energy load, and we need to measure it and minimise it. Okay, 3 planks to Passivhaus, if you like. Really, really challenging performance standards. So I've said a lot about that already. A really clever design methodology and brilliant tools, so that if you have the fortunate experience to have a Passivhaus consultant in your team and you're delivering a Passivhaus project, as per my yellow chart a moment ago, that team should have great tools to deliver a great project. So you're not left out in the cold hoping for the best. You've got great tools to see you through the design and the construction processes. And then finally, quality, quality, quality. On-site, the construction quality has to match and deliver the design quality as well. And the designers should have done their job so well that the construction is actually easier than it would have been before. Right, we're almost there, folks. And I'll do my project experience, then we'll pass on. Okay, so this one I'm going to just briefly mention. If you want the PDFs for this afterwards, I can happily provide them. I'm not going to go into the detail. Passivhaus is actually 3 standards in one. So premium plus classic. Generally, when we say the word Passivhaus, we mean Passivhaus Classic. We just don't say the classic bit afterwards. You can see the numbers on screen. Very low energy demand, very low air leakage rates through the building, and then some other standards around energy, acoustics, and overheating as well. So it's a comfort and a quality standard that happens to also deliver very low energy. Do ask more about that later if you want, but I'm going to pass on now due to reasons of time. Okay, this is a critical slide because it tells you about the scale of Passivhaus and why it costs less for larger buildings. So if you have a building on the left-hand side of my chart here, so a form factor, which is the measure of the building envelope area to the useful floor area, of around the 0.8 to 1.8, there's a 1 to 2-ish. In other words, a very compact building, generally a larger project, a multi-resi, multi-story building, or a larger project, you will find Passivhaus extremely cost-effective if it's designed and delivered well, as per what I've said earlier. If you're in the middle, so we're now talking kind of terraced housing or equivalent archetypes of that sort, it might still be quite cost-effective, but it's beginning to get a bit more challenging. And if you're at the other end, so this is detached houses or smaller houses, it's still doable, but it gets more challenging to achieve the energy performance and quality that are asked of us for Passivhaus. So I want to be completely honest about that. The scale of the project is the single biggest determinant of its overcost for Passivhaus. And the second factor is how well designed the project was. The better designed, the lower the overcost. Right, I'm going to quickly rattle through for you what we're doing in London for apartments, and then we'll see how that might spin out to other building types as well. So we've got our 3 planks here, which are improved fabric performance, window optimization, and decentralized heat, so exhaust air heat pumps. I'll quickly run through those one at a time for you. So first of all, improved building fabric. In London, you'll see the numbers on screen there are not actually more onerous than Part L. In fact, in some cases they are less onerous, less challenging than Part L. In particular, wall U values are 100 ml of mineral wool in the cavity and another 100 in the SFS layer, so kind of 150 equivalent, I suppose, in a cavity wall. So not excessive, not vastly more, if any more, than you would have done for regs compliance. But we have absolutely hammered the thermal bridging, driven down the air tightness, and improved the windows and ventilation as we go along. So what we've done is we've targeted the things that matter, and we've left the things that are already kind of okay-ish, so wall U values, where they needed to be. It's very pragmatic. It's not some kind of idealism that says, no matter what we do, we're going to blast it out of the park. No, you say, this is our target. We will spend money up to hitting the target. We will not spend money beyond that. That's pointless. That's a pointless waste for everybody. We've got such a great standard to work to. You don't spend beyond target, you spend to it. Okay, so that's fabric. Next, heat pump in a box. So this would also work on small individual resi projects, but not larger ones. And it works a treat in multi-resi apartments. So rather than a big heat pump on the roof, a lot of pipe work scattering its way down to a large project, you put a single box, one in each apartment. Each person has their own, effectively, their own boiler, if you like. You know, back in good old days of having your own heating system, and they control the electricity that's supplied to that system, and it provides the heating, cooling, ventilation, and hot water in a single box. It's considerably cheaper than centralised systems, as well as lower carbon in every metric. And finally, this is the critical one for London, but it would also apply to non-London, less dense projects as well, window optimisations. So we typically find that windows are designed more for aesthetic reasons than they are for functional reasons. As a consequence, heating systems are larger, cooling systems are larger, carbon emissions are higher, and so on and so on. In high-performance buildings, windows are the single most important design parameter, and if they're done well, they will save money and drive down the cost and size of systems. If they're done badly, they may look great, in fact they often do, they will not perform great, and actually the resident or occupant will not thank you later for high heating bills, cooling bills, or poor thermal comfort that results from larger windows that weren't sized correctly and orientated correctly. Right on screen now is a high density London project. It's one of our largest ones actually. I think it's a 1,500 home scheme, so we're not suggesting this is happening every day of the week for most folk, but what we spend time learning and doing on projects of this scale trickles down into the other scales of projects as well. And this project critically was optimised for all those three things I've just described at the same time with this software system you're seeing on screen. And what came out of that was this sort of idea where the team gets this macro set of solutions, so I think there's 1,134 different ways of tackling the problem, and then together as a team we navigated our way through, using it as a map, to find the single best solution that was lowest cost, highest quality, most straightforward to deliver on site, and so on and so on and so on. So by having all the options up front, you get to pick your favourite as a team, and then you build it out and you experience fewer problems because you've made the right choices earlier on in the project. Right, final section folks, and then we'll have a next step. So projects, I'm just going to quickly highlight for you, I'm going to jump straight through to the one that you're probably most interested in, which is Barratt's announcement of recent times. So they're the first, but not the only, large-scale developer to announce Passivhaus as a standard. There's 2 or 3 other developers, one in Northern Ireland and a couple of others in London that are either about to announce or are planning how they will announce the use of Passivhaus at scale. Barratt got through the gates first, as it were. They announced in April. It was in the Times as an article. Every London apartment built by Barratt from this point onwards will be certified to the Passivhaus Classic standard. And the way they've done that is how I just described it to you. There's 3 circles inside the circle. Each of those is optimised absolutely to the absolute nth degree, and they leave no stone unturned to get it exactly right. So it's not 98% right, it is 100% optimum. No waste anywhere in the system from an energy, daylight, climate resilience, and energy perspective. You all that together, you strike through the middle of the bullseye, you don't waste anything anywhere, and as a consequence you can build these better buildings, more climate resilient, lower energy, for the same money or even less money than you would have spent on a poorer, lower quality product. So it's a very much a win-win for the likes of Barratt, and of course for the residents who inherit or purchase or rent these incredible houses that are comfortable, quiet, filtered air, healthy, happy homes, or indeed non-homes as well. So win-win all round, and hats off to Barratt for taking a brave step, albeit based on great science, data and design that they had thoroughly vetted. So this wasn't on a whim. It took them several years to make this decision, and it was based on really excellent design that they knew they could see through and deliver. So that's a summary there. So this is what we've been doing as Beyond Carbon. We were working with Barrett through that whole process, and other developers similarly. And really what we found was, by focusing on quality, with cost limitations at every step, we ended up driving through better quality at lower cost and a better outcome as well. So I think my concluding point really, oh that's really tiny actually, is that what we've learned from Multi-Resi in London, we can then send those lessons out into the rest of the industry as well, and help folk to deliver better buildings than they currently feel they can afford to do, but at lower cost than they thought they could do. Thank you.
Have we got any questions for Joel? Any questions they'd like to ask straight away, or?
I've got one question. On Barrett's construction quality, how have they approached the supply chain issues of how it's traditionally done in house building, or just getting homes for the lowest price?
That's a great question. So it's about how have Barrett dealt with the supply chain issue of selecting on lowest price. They've done a couple of things actually, and they're also in the process of doing more as well. So one thing that they very publicly and happily declare is they're working really hard on education. So they are building out education classrooms, sort of site classrooms that they'll drop onto every site that have different strands for different supply chain members. So for example, we mentioned already that air tightness is a really big jump up compared to some of the other smaller tweaks. So they've got a whole education program devoted to supply chain partners that relate to air tightness. So if you go anywhere near the airtight line of a building that they're working on site, you will have passed through their air tightness cabin, if you like, and been trained in how your trade and your tools affect the overall building air tightness and how to do that in a way that works. So it's not rocket science. We've been vetting quality on Barrett sites for a couple of years, as I said, and you find things like ductwork comes to the airtight line, and on a non-Passivhaus project, it doesn't really matter how airtight it is, because 3 or 4 is easy peasy, and so they just sort of terminate it at the airtight line and just cut a hole in the fabric of the breather membrane. Leave it at that, and it's kind of good enough. That'll do. And we were like, well, if you want Passivhaus, you're going to have to seal that duct to the airtight line. So here's a little grommet. You just take it on here like that, pitch bash bosh, and then you slide the duct through this lovely piece of rubber seal. It's a single component, it's not particularly expensive, it's actually quicker than the way they were attaching it previously. And instead of it leaking air out round the duct through the breather membrane, it's now tightly sealed, and you can take the integrity of the line. So that means the duct installer has to pass through the classroom, discover what that grommet looks like, realise it's pretty straightforward for them, it's a minor tweak to how they normally operate their installation, and then you just have to manage the quality of that as you go across the site. That's just one of hundreds of things they're doing. But basically, it's education, tweaking how we do things to achieve marginal gains 1,000 times over, all of which add up to these really significant changes we see when we do the whole thing really, really well. So education, I think. Minimum cost, that's a challenging one. I don't think developers can compete with each other without fighting for minimum cost. So it's about how you achieve minimum cost with sufficient quality to deliver the outcomes you're after.
Just following on from that, do you envisage a time, a bit like the old CPS, where the cars used to be, skill sets and things, do you envisage a time when there is going to be a requirement for a skill card to ensure that Passivhaus is actually met?
Yes, I do. I mean, there is already such a thing. It's just not widely adhered to. So there is a contractor's Passivhaus course. It's a 2-day hands-on sort of tools type course rather than the theoretical stuff you do in the 2-week designer course. I mean, both are great. So you could easily say to your site team, well, you have to have the Passivhaus tradesperson qualification in order to work on this site. In practice, that's quite hard to do because of all the supply chain complexity and partners and so on. So what main contractors tend to do is put 2 or 3 critical members of their team through the Passivhaus designer and tradesperson courses, which kind of complement each other to some degree, and they become the champions for Passivhaus on site, and that means they can then pass on some of the education to critical supply chain members and so on. So it's impractical to have 150 different workforce members all pass through the same course, at least today. Give it 10 years, maybe that will be completely practical, but for today what we end up doing is having champions who've got the full training package,
passing smaller parts of training down through the chain of command.
Lee?
Yeah, just one. We make a lot of passive houses. They tend to be more like self-built projects, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, than environmentally conscious. But we've done a few of the bigger sort of social housing schemes. One of the things we've had with the social housing, or the larger schemes, is they often start off as a passive house and just slowly degrade as a project goes. So I guess my question is, have you got any experience of that, and any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So what was your name, sorry?
Lee.
Lee, thanks Lee. So that one, just for the live stream, that's about the loss of passive house as you go through a design process. So people start with a great ambition at the beginning, perhaps typically in social housing, and then all the usual pressures of cost and everything else sort of vie for attention, and by the time you actually end up designing and sort of building out the thing, it's no longer a passive house at all, it's got watered down. The answer is yes, we regularly experience that. And the trick is to get the early parts right so that there's no need to de-engineer the passive house side of it. So if passive house doesn't cost more done right, there's no reason to lose it as you go through the process. You've just got to fight for the quality. So at that point, it comes really down to client ambition and commitment. So you want the client, the end client, so this would be the social housing provider typically, in the case you're describing me, to realise quite early on, oh, blimey, passive house is the way to go for this. I'm going to commit strongly, I'm going to appoint the right team, and I'm going to stick with them through thick and thin. If the client's got that kind of commitment, you'll see it through. So generally when it starts to wobble, the critical thing is to go back to the end client and reiterate why they chose passive house in the first place, and why that's the best decision for them, for their ultimate tenants and stakeholders, and then say, so let's fight for it together and see it through. So I do spend a fair bit of my professional life fighting to retain passive house against the commercial forces, and convincing people that we can do it cost effectively, actually. It's not pie in the sky, it's got to be cost effective. It can't be 4% more expensive, otherwise we can't afford to do it. It's got to be driven ultimately by cost. Best quality at the cost we can actually afford. So yeah, I totally agree, and it's a fight worth fighting, and we do it a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, passive house in existing buildings. Is it feasible? Is it again a matter of scale?
Yeah.
Given that the country is predominantly, consists of semi-detached or detached houses, the majority of people live in this kind of buildings. How could we tackle that?
Great, thank you. So for the live stream again, that's around, can we do passive house on existing buildings, and perhaps in particularly existing houses, and with the common archetypes in the UK of semi-detached and detached, is that feasible? I'll say two things. So first of all, no, it's not feasible, and secondly, yes, it is. The no is, if you were to try and certify every house in Britain to the NFIT standard, which is the passive house retrofit standard, it would cost a fortune. You'd end up with some fabulous housing, and crikey, I would jump into an NFIT house any day of the week versus something else that wasn't as good, because it would have all the benefits of a new build passive house, really, or close to it. The actual cost of doing that would be phenomenal. I have no idea how many trillions it is, but it'd be a lot. And so practically, we're going to have to do something a little bit more balanced than that. That's the kind of gold standard, and it's not technically unfeasible, it's financially or commercially non-feasible to pay for all that. So we have to find a solution somewhere in the middle, I think. Sometimes we'll get a chance to really do deep retrofit down even to the NFIT standard and certify. Often we will not, and the likes of Nigel Banks at Octopus and others would say fabric fifth, not fabric first. We start with heat pumps, we drive down carbon emissions by well-designed, well-engineered heat pump systems, and we also deal with ventilation and some small bits of air tightness, but we can't go all the way to NFIT. I agree with that, but I'd say, well, let's be at least a little bit ambitious. Where we can, let's go deep retrofit, because the residents or occupants of the building will have a happier, healthier time if we do. But sometimes the best we're going to manage is heat pump plus ventilation and air tightness. And that's a kind of regrettable reality of the commercial situation we face with 26 million homes, however many it is. We haven't got the time or the money to NFIT every single one, so we have to do things slightly more quickly.
Yeah, one more question, and I'm going to have to...
It's related. So you were mentioning heat pumps. How well are they performing in a building that's not fitted to the NFIT standards?
That's a complex question. It's slightly outside of scope, but I'll give you a 30-second one. I can see the time is ticking on. So despite what you might read in some broadsheet newspapers that seem to have an editorial bias against heat pumps and are stating actual science falsehoods as they do that, the reality is almost every building in Britain could at some level operate using a heat pump. The question is how efficient and cost effective would that heat pump be, and what extent would you need to change things like radiator sizes. So the basic picture is, if you can deal with a bit of air tightness upgrades, install a decent ventilation system, and insulate simple stuff like lofts, pretty much every building in Britain could be heat pumped. If you can't do any of that, Georgian grade 1 listed mansion, it'll still work with a heat pump, but you're going to need to work harder and it's going to be more expensive to run afterwards. So heat pumps are most commonly fitted in Scandinavia, where it's badly freezing. Their houses are more efficient, but even their inefficient buildings still run successfully on heat pumps. So a heat pump can replace a boiler if well engineered in any building. The issue is how cost effective or expensive it would be to run in the aftermath of that.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Joel. That was really informative, and I think you're sticking around for a bit longer, so when we have the coffee break, if you've got any more questions, I appreciate we couldn't get everyone's questions asked. You can speak to Joel in the coffee break. I'm just going to ask Sam to come up to the stage, and he's just going to give a quick talk about who he represents, why he's here, and yeah, if you'd like to give Sam a warm welcome. So Sam Tuck from RIBA UK.
Morning guys, welcome. Thanks for showing up to this first CPD with CPD morning with Karma. So very briefly, I think have I got a clicker? Should have a clicker.
Press down.
There we go. Great. So my name's Sam Tuck. I'm the technical sales manager for Blauberg UK. Very briefly about who we are and what we do. So we're a European, German headquartered manufacturer of ventilation products. We manufacture everything from a standard 100mm bathroom fan all the way up to very large ventilation units, air handling units and commercial NVHR units. So our headquarters is over in Munich. This is a bit of a boring bit, so I'll rattle through it. There's loads of us all over the globe. Importantly, we're 50 guys and girls up in Leicester, where we have full design, specification, distribution and a small amount of manufacturing as well. So we're very well equipped for the UK market to provide you with everything from your basic, I need a bathroom fan please, all the way up to I have a sports centre, swimming pool, that type of situation, and I need to ventilate it. Next slide. So, basic resi, a lot of you will be very familiar with this type of project, this type of product. So this is a standard residential NVHR unit, nothing out of the ordinary, great spec on the unit. Importantly, and probably for you guys to know, what we offer as a manufacturer is every part of the ventilation system that you see. So you can come to us, we will provide you with a baseline specification, quotation, all the way up to a full design for your property. That includes the NVHR unit, insulated ducting, non-insulated ducting, the ducting that runs out through to each and every one of your rooms, both branch, which a lot of the guys that will deal with Passivhaus on a daily basis will say, I only install branch because I can guarantee my system performance. We can also guarantee that system performance with a radial system. So the radial system is the green ducting that you see there, clipped up and runs from distribution boxes off of the main system. So very much like an underfloor heating manifold, you've got a ventilation duct, manifold and system, providing continual fresh air as well as continually extracting and recovering that heat as well. This is a live project about 3 miles from our Leicester HQ, which was I'm going to keep my 2 outside walls, I'm going to completely disassemble the roof and reassemble it exactly as it is just to meet planning, and it was a full entire retrofit including underfloor, heat pumps, increased insulation, ventilation, the works. So this was actually done to the LETI standard and achieved it absolutely no issue. other bits and bobs that we do, so we do commercial NVHR units, so this may be boring to some, may be interesting to others. So on the right hand side of the screen we've got a project which was a change of use up in Newcastle. This was an old BT Telecoms block of offices. They turned it into 242 apartments. That got a ceiling mounted NVHR unit, and then on the left hand side a complete change from an old malting house in Burton-upon-Trent, so home of the brewers, to offices. So that got a full windows and doors, internal insulation, internal air tightness, and ventilation upgrade. The challenges on both were, well, potentially relatively obvious. Change of use, minimum ceiling voids because nothing's designed for modern day services. So that got one of our compact NVHR units, centrally located in each apartment, allowing full control for each apartment, which is ventilation rate and temperature. That also combated the issues of overheating that was prevalent on some of the apartments due to the orientation of the building. So that was all covered. The left-hand side project, so the retrofit, refurbishment, complete change of use, sort of really restricted access. So that actually across 3 floors took on our flat pack NVHR units. So we offer our commercial products IKEA style, for want of a better phrase. So whatever specification is required for that project, we'll deliver it to you on site, and it literally gets assembled within a day to 2 days max. So super flexible, and you're able to hit your ventilation requirements, along with offering obviously heat recovery as well. And really that's basically it for me. In terms of a manufacturer here supporting today, this is exactly the type of event we like to do, because we get to speak directly to you guys, introduce the brand to you. A lot of you won't be familiar with Blauberg, and that's completely normal. We've been in the UK since 2011, so we are still relatively the new guys, but please rest assured we have been around since 1952, albeit in Germany. So completely useless to everybody in the room. However, we are the team up in Leicester ready to help you out with any of your ventilation requirements. I won't take any questions now, but what I will do is take all your questions later if you like. I'll be through next door, so if anybody needs me, I will be here now all the way up until the last one standing. So that's me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam. He'll be next door. So we're going to just take a small break. If we say back in the room for 10:25, so for teas and coffees. You may have seen we've probably over-catered. We had about 97 signed up for today, so we've got plenty of food, so please don't be shy. Go and have some pastries, some rolls, teas and coffees. We're back in at 10:25 for our next speakers. Okay, thank you.
So I think that'll be a meeting offer.
Okay, we good to go? Hello, we're Q2 and we will be talking to you a little bit about building contracts, so please try and stay awake. Is that better?
Yeah.
Hello. We're Q2 and we'll talk to you a little bit about some pitfalls on different building contracts with a bit of a focus on JCT. I'm Ben Walpole, chartered surveyor, got various credentials to talk about contracts. Got a master's in construction law, do a bit of expert witness work, and Dave and I work on various projects, setting up contracts and operating them.
Morning everyone, I'm Dave Buxton and like Ben, I'm also a chartered quantity surveyor and been client side for about 6 years now. For 25 years prior to that I worked in the tier 1 sector as a contractor's QS, and I guess that makes me living proof that you can teach old dogs new tricks. So we're going to run through a few things this morning about JCT, starting with common forms of contract based on the Contracts in Use survey, and for those in the room we'll be asking for some audience participation just to gauge your views on it. Moving on to then common pitfalls that we've experienced with both setting up and operating the contract. We'll then spend a moment or two talking about completing contracts and what to do in the event of completion or non-completion. A quick summary of what we've discussed before handing the floor back to you for Q&A.
So we wanted to sort of just gauge everyone's opinions on contracts. So we looked at, it's a few years old now, but they don't change very often. But this is the RIBA Contracts in Use survey in 2022. And we're just going to go through a few things on the most commonly used contracts, different tendering strategies, single stage, two stage, different procurement strategies, design and build and traditional, where all the design is done by a contractor, or whether it's all all the responsibilities stays with the employer, or obviously there's a bit of a hybrid sometimes, and the pricing mechanisms, traditional lump sum contracts, remeasurable contracts, built of quantities, and sort of the market preference for different ones. So we'll start with a little survey. So if you want to put some hands up, we were interested to know which contracts you think organisations have used most often. So these are actual data from the survey, so it's not necessarily your perception or what you think the market perception might be. So is JCT the most dominant? NECs, that's the new engineering contract, RIBA forms of contract, or perhaps others. So any hands for JCT? NEC? RIBA? And the scores on the doors are JCT by quite a margin. I've looked at these contracts. RICS used to do a similar version, and JCT has always been dominant. NEC rising in popularity, supposed to be a more collaborative form of contract, got mandated on lots of public sector projects. RIBA still have their building contracts which are used, but yeah, JCT is by far the most dominant. Generally because it's so well established, it has been around since 1931. It was actually formed by a consortium of architects originally, and it's the most well known by consultants, contractors. It's also been most tested in court, so lots of JCT contracts in court means lots of clauses have been tested. There's lots of definitions on clauses which people understand.
Okay, moving on to preferred tendering strategies, and again this is based on the Contracts in Use survey, but I'm also keen to understand what you're working with. So we're just focusing on single stage, two stage, or a one-on-one negotiation. So can I have a show of hands for whose preference is single stage tendering? Two stage? What about one-on-one direct negotiation? Okay, interesting. So our survey said single stage is still the most preferred, with employers still wanting to get that competition out there, promote the competitive edge. Although interestingly, as you can see, two-stage and one-on-one negotiation are pretty much neck and neck now to promote that collaborative view. And certainly, if you tick the right option, supplementary box in the JCT, you should be working more collaborative anyway.
Interesting, surprising that most of it was negotiation. Is that your own personal preferences or client-led? Yes.
Mine is personally based on project size. Right?
Yeah.
If it's the project is too small, it's not really worth attending.
Yeah. Usually, often you can get a better end result in negotiation and an open book collaborative process, but obviously lots of clients want to see the market value, or see prices in competition. So sometimes it's hard to justify negotiation when a client wants to see a competitive process.
I actually think it depends on the project and kind of set parameters, and it's sort of actually a bit of a hybrid of the processes.
Yeah. Well, I think the two-stage process where you have sort of mini competition and then it's sort of an open book negotiated second stage, it's actually a really good procurement process, but underutilised. So what is the most frequently used pricing structure? So historically, bill of quantities, spec and drawings, cost plus. And what we mean by bill of quantities is a bill that is remeasurable. So it's not a fixed lump sum. Spec and drawings would be, the contractor's got a price for the spec and drawings, and whatever's on the spec and drawings is included. And obviously cost plus, which is a progressive costing exercise. So bill of quantities, most used, few hands. Spec and drawings, a fixed price. Cost plus. So fixed price lump sum, by far the preferred route. And again, interesting that lots of negotiation and preferences in the room, but cost certainty seems to drive lots of the survey results. So fixed price lump sums, by far the most used.
Moving on then to most frequently used procurement method, be that a traditional or a design and build scenario. So show of hands please for traditional procurement method. And then same for D&B. Okay, we've got a lot of hands down there, so for those that didn't put their hand up, what...
50-50.
Sorry?
Right.
Yeah, so the balance, isn't it, between the two?
Yeah, okay, and certainly that's borne out with the survey there, and depending on whether you view CDP with traditional there, you end up with a 56% sway to a traditional form of procurements, as opposed to 34% for D&B and 40% without. So certainly experience has shown that you don't necessarily need to keep traditional contracts to smaller value projects. I myself am looking at two traditional schemes at the moment. One is a £3.3 million house refurb in Kensington with M&E and bizarrely staircases as CDP. It's going quite well. Everybody's working together collaboratively. It was a single stage negotiation. The contractor, professional team in certain places has changed, including us. We were brought in to conclude the negotiations. We weren't there at the beginning, but it's running through, and also come to the end of a £5.6 million office refurb in central Winchester. That looked pretty straightforward as a traditional, and then the tenant turned up, and that derailed things slightly, but with a 16-week AOT, the contractor will finish in about 14 weeks' time. providing we get some mains power. So it can be done either way, and that's a good example of one that could have been a D&B or a traditional, but we opted for the former, and it seems to have been well received all around.
The interesting thing is purely traditional contracts, I think, are on the decline. You know, when we talk about traditional contracts, they usually do include contracted design portions, so there are always some discrete elements, often M&E, but it could be, you know, waterproofing or, say, staircases or balustrades that you want contracted design. So just wanted to pick out a few things on the surveys just to show some trends. Still a JCT bias. Like NEC was favour of the month for very big projects and engineering projects, but even on some projects and clients where they were inclined to NEC, people seem to be shifting back a little bit. So JCT still very much the front runner, and most of the procurement processes are cost driven. The RIBA survey, sort of, a lot of the focus was about collaboration, and the question was, you know, are we seeing more collaboration in the contracts? But you'll see, you know, cost-driven procurement is still very much at the forefront of sort of clients' minds.
And moving on to setting up the contract and the traps and pitfalls to avoid. So we put this slide up with these bullet points based on our experience and sort of reflecting on things that we've seen good, but something mostly bad. So hence why we're flagging them as pitfalls, really. And to start with, the articles and recitals at the front of the JCT is the thing to get absolutely spot on correct to avoid problems later down the line. Recognising the importance of the roles, certainly. The contract administrator and the QS can be one and the same. They could be different people, but please don't put that TBC character in there, because you'll soon get frustrated when they don't actually do anything for you. We found that. Commencement and completion dates, again, this needs to be fairly well nailed down. Don't put an arbitrary date in. If you're not sure when the job's going to start, or the client stalls for whatever reason, just don't put the dates in the contract, because straight away that opens up the door for an extension of time. Sorry, Karma. But it's not a place you want to be on the back foot with the client on day one. Sectional completions, if they apply, put them in. The employer may want to take something later on, but if you haven't put the provision in there, it's just a more difficult negotiation. You can get around it with partial possession, but we don't always recommend that.
We see that a lot with phase programs, that there's lots of detail about phasing, but actually nothing is put in the contract with sectional completion. So in theory, unless you go through partial possession, you haven't defined that a section is going to be handed over in advance, and that's now going to be occupied by the employer. So yeah, phase programs really need to think about sectional completions. That gives different dates, and sometimes with the phase, you know, a different section can't start until the previous section might have completed. So it's a bit of thought to go in on that.
Indeed. The other big ticket item really on the list is insurances, particularly if you're working in an existing building, ensuring that you have a joint owners policy in place with the employer and contractor. You don't want to find yourself in the position I found myself in autumn of 2000, working on a job in Bristol. Big storm one weekend, blew the temporary roof off a part of the building that was being constructed. It just also happened to be where the main electrical panel was. So there was a twofold problem there. There was the neighbours who weren't particularly impressed with fishing bits of scaffold out of their front garden over the course of the weekend, and we had a very awkward set of conversations with them on the Monday morning, and of course then going to the client saying we need to claim for your insurance because of this, it's a storm, it's your building, it's your risk, and then the client turned around saying, I'm not insured, I thought that was contractor's risk policy. So please double check with the employer before setting up the contract that they have actually got insurance in place. Damages as well, that needs to be in conjunction conversations with the employer to make sure that you have a pre-estimate of loss. There, it's not down to you as the contract drafter to come up with a figure for that. Again, we've had experiences of where former colleagues have put numbers in thinking that they're doing the right thing, to find out later on when they need to levy the damages, and the client's looking at their actual losses and there isn't enough in there to cover. Now, it has to be a pre-estimate of loss. That could be anything from prolonged insurance charges, finance charges, rent on other premises, and other things besides. But providing you've got something scientific there that if you were challenged you could justify it, then that's perfectly acceptable. Moving on, when setting up the contracts, again, it's just a sanity check on who are you in contract with. Make sure you've got the registered address of the right company, particularly if it's a group of companies. Just that secondary check at Companies House, that may seem obvious, but we've seen it a couple of times where the regional office has gone in instead of the registered office, which is a problem later on when, if you need to serve a notice. And then again, making sure that the contractor design portions are defined, particularly when you think about recital 2. If you want a contractor to design a particular piece of work, it does need to be described pretty much exactly. Ben and I found ourselves on a job 5 years ago where there was lots of inferred reference to contractor design. The employer thought the contractor was designing the entire timber frame for this block of houses and flats that we were doing in the middle of Croydon. When we checked the contracts, there was no reference whatsoever. It was all inferred because it was discussed off the record. It hadn't been reported into the contract, so the employer bore the cost of every single change and the delays that came with it.
On when a contract's put together, obviously the JCT is a standard form, and all the forms, you know, they're standard forms of contract, which, you know, the contract drafters have tried to get a balanced measure of risk between the employer and the contractor. But there are schedules of amendments often needed, usually driven by the employer, but occasionally contractors might request amendments too. Obviously they are, you know, legally changing the details of the clauses, so really need to be drafted by solicitors, but also needs to be incorporated into the contract properly. So sometimes you might have a schedule of amendments, but if it's not incorporated into the JCT, essentially you need to add an extra article explaining the incorporation and make sure the amendments are sort of also signed, then they might not be binding. So it's an important provision if there are schedules of amendments, but one, they're drafted properly, and two, they are incorporated into the contract. Also wanted to talk about the principle of the entire agreement. So entire agreement clause is essentially anything that went before the contract, you know, doesn't really exist. You know, the contract is the entire agreement, and we regularly have this on projects where there were discussions previously, or you know, in a claim scenario, you know, something that was discussed informally or even formally. If it doesn't make its way into the contract, unfortunately, it doesn't exist. So that's it's really important. All those pre-contract discussions make their way into, you know, even the tender query process. When you go out to tender, contractors might ask a query, it's answered. You know, does that then get reflected into the final contract documents? So yeah, the purpose of entire agreement is quite important to understand.
Moving on to similar pitfalls when it comes to operating the contract. The first one we started with there is the notice provisions and the timescales that go with it. So as the recipient CAs, you need to be notified by the contractors forthwith when things become reasonably apparent, so that gives you a chance to mitigate any problems, for example materials that are discontinued partway through, or there's another issue with sign-offs of something. You don't want to find yourself in a position where the programme's been resequenced without your input or views to try and get around the problem, to then be told 6 months later, oh, we had a problem back there, here's our notification of delay. It's too late, it can't happen. The JCTs have a design submission procedure. We don't see that getting used quite a lot, but it is there for good reason. It has the ABC comment structure, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. We see it more at the M&E the M&E consultants tend to follow that more, but it's there for good reason. It's there for your use, and yeah, we do encourage that you use it. It gives a 5 to 14 day period for response on both sides. I'm sure you've all been party to things just being thrown over on email, and you're asked to approve it there and then, which is great if you're able to respond proactively. But if you're on holiday or busy, all of a sudden you've fallen foul of the design submission procedure without realising it because it wasn't being followed properly. So our advice is don't allow it to happen in the first place. Extensions of time, again with JCT, it's not a case of one size fits all. The design build form is slightly different to the intermediate form, and the intermediate form is the one we see more of, and that gives you 8 weeks from receipt of, no, the design and build form, beg your pardon, gives you 8 weeks from receipt of information to review and assess, whereas the intermediate form is 12 weeks, and I believe, Ben, you said to me the other day that the intermediate guide has a slightly different view on life on that one.
The assessing extensions of time have always been, you should do it as soon as you can, but interestingly, JCT do in their guide, the reason it's 12 weeks from PC is they think it's helpful sometimes to see how delays plan out. It's quite hard to see when there's lots of moving parts, and so it's a bit contradictory because JCT does say it should be done as soon as reasonably practicable, or exactly the wording, but also says it can be 12 weeks from PC. It doesn't give a lot of certainty for clients and contractors. So, if a delay is clear, obviously extension of time should be granted, but sometimes you need some time to assess it thoroughly and see how events come into play.
Thank you. So, when assessing your extension of time applications, then there must be clear relevance to relevant events which award time, and if done properly, there may also be reference to relevant matters which give money. As an awarder, you can award one or the other, and often both, depending on the circumstances, which naturally, if you've got money, that opens the door to loss and expense, and if it's being done properly, the intermediate form, again, just sticking with that by way of example in particular, says that you have to be given monthly updates by the contractor, and there should be also an ascertainment period with a 14-day update given to you thereafter. That's quite important, rather than just the wait and see approach. It should always be kept abreast, which also helps inform the employer of where that's going in the event that it becomes a bit prolonged.
So the final part was completing the contract, and so there's lots of process at the end, and really to say that it doesn't finish at practical completion. So obviously at practical completion, prior to practical completion there can be non-completion, so where the contractor doesn't finish by the completion date, whether that's the original completion date or an adjusted completion date from an extension of time, there's a requirement to issue a notice of non-completion. That can also be cancelled out by a subsequent extension of time, and obviously if there is non-completion and the client is inclined to deduct damages, there's a process there which is quite complicated in terms of notices of intention to deduct damages, and then confirming that damages will be deducted, and then issuing pay less notices on payments. So an important process, if that is happening, that it's followed properly. The final account procedure happens after PC. See, it's great when you can get to PC with a final account agreed, and obviously that's what everyone should strive for. But there is actually a 6-month period following practical completion for the contractor to issue details of the final account, and then a further 3 months for the contract administrator to assess that final account. So you reach PC, you may have outstanding extensions of time to deal with. You could then also have 9 months of final accounting, and then you get onto the defects process. So the rectification period used to be called the defects liability period, usually 6 or 12 months. You've also got that period where latent defects might come to light that need to be addressed by the contractor, and there's a process right at the end. And if defects haven't been made good by the end of that period, they can be deducted in the final account. And that paves the way for the final certificate. So the final certificate is issued at the end of the rectification period, and all those things need to be resolved: extensions of time, final account, defects, and the final certificate becomes conclusive. And there's really only one recourse left, and that is within 28 days of the final certificate. That's adjudication or dispute can be raised.
And just to round off then with a quick summary of the pitfalls. So make sure to begin with you select the right contract that meets the needs of the client and the specifics of the project. Ensure that you have the correct people in the correct roles. None of these TBC characters. There's always somebody, and if it's a CA or QS, sorry for the shameless plug, we are available. Make sure it's operated correctly. It doesn't have to be contractual if everybody's on board. The rules are there to protect both parties. It's not meant to be a stick to beat the contractor over the head with. Work collaboratively to avoid disputes. It can be seen that the contract is adversarial. It isn't. I'll go back to what I just said, that it's there, the set of rules and guidelines to protect both parties, and if everybody's on board with that, it doesn't need to be adversarial at all. Again, just to recap on what I said earlier about the supplementary provisions box in the JCT, there is one there that talks about collaborative working, so if you have said that applies, then obviously you're encouraged to follow it. And then manage the contract to completion. It's not over until it's over, and if you're on a project these days with Building Safety Act provisions, then you're living with it for 15 years one way or another. It's not just a case of get it over the line with a PC certificate. If there's a latent defect there and there's a building safety regulator there, it could be as long as 15 years, but more often than not, it's somewhere between 6 and 12, depending on the way you set the contract up. That brings us to the end of the talk. Thank you for listening, and any questions?
Thank you. I'm George.
Could you just
give us an easy one.
I think you know what's coming. Could you just restate the importance of stating the CDPs correctly in the recycling?
Well, ultimately, like talk about the entire agreement clause. If it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist. So the example that Dave gave, it wasn't just that the CDP wasn't put in that particular contract for that block of flats. The architect's drawings and the engineer's drawings said that all the timber frame was the contractor's design. The form of contract didn't even allow any design. It was one of those contracts that was purely traditional contract. It didn't even allow contractor's design in it. So it's important, and it's not just important that with the entire agreement thing. If you have agreed something, people often go on their merry way that they did agree it. But it's important that when you are entering into contracts, everyone understands. You're both on the same page on who's doing what, or you start on the site and suddenly there's a gap there. So it's important to, often we see now, a CDP schedule. So we'll when we're putting tender docs together, we'll say to the client side team, please advise of any sort of CDP elements, and you might get a list from the architect, a couple of things from the structural engineer, the M&E, and if you put that into a CDP schedule, and then even have some additional notes, because it's never completely black or white. That there might be the structural frame is by the employer, but connections are by the contractor. So you can have responsibility matrix to make it really clear, and that CDP schedule can be in the contract, making it clear to everyone who's doing what.
So the importance is that the CDPs need to be accurately stated for what they are.
Yeah, Yeah, I actually like the responsibility matrix, even if it's not CDP, because there can be things, that the client wants to supply the sanitary ware, and the responsibility matrix can be supply, but there are other obligations in there. Who's unpacking it, checking it for damage? Who's distributing it if the supplier's dumping it on the curbside? So I quite like the response. It takes a little bit of head scratching, making sure that if everyone's clear who's doing what, then you're not going to be having disputes when you're on site and everyone's busy trying to get things built. Yeah.
I've got one going back to...
Sorry, I'll come back to you.
Yeah. Sorry, no, you go.
Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, so JCT versus NEC. As you mentioned, public sector particularly, they tend to use them more and more, but have you seen any trend favouring NEC in private sector projects lately? I mean, having worked with NEC, it seems like the language is more concise. There's the early warning system that seems to work well. But have you seen any trend lately favouring NEC in private sector?
The trend I've seen is that once you've operated a few NEC contracts, people would like to go back to JCT. Right. My personal opinion is it's very good in theory, but it's quite hard to operate. Mm-hmm. And if you think, going back to the extensions of time and having lots of period to review it, there isn't really that time in the NEC. You've got to agree costs and time on each compensation event, and it can actually distract from the building work because it's very process driven.
Small regions.
It's very administrative heavy. We do a little bit of marine work. They still like using NEC, and we have another private sector client who was preferred NEC, but we are actually moving a bit away from that.
So no increasing trend?
No, I don't think so. I think, like I say, it's very good in theory, but the simple language, again, it's very simple. It's very helpful for the layperson operating it because you understand it. But it goes back to the point about the JCT, particular terms like best endeavours, and they've been defined in the courts. So
yes, it makes it easier to test.
Yeah, there are reasons that there are particular sort of terms used which might seem a bit archaic, but it's clear for people what that means.
We go back to forms of the procurement strategies, single stage, very classic way of doing things. Where I see the problems with single stage is that it encourages people to minimise the complexity of the build and to minimise the costs in order to get the foot in the door, and then the client gets hit with a load of we priced for this, but it's actually going to be that. The classic example I had from many years ago, an architect drew on a drawing a gutter. Now I looked at that gutter and I go, that's going to have to be made out of 3 mil aluminium. I priced for 0.7 because it didn't say I couldn't. So you win the job and you go, oh no, we have to do it in 3 mil because now we've done some calculations and look, that's. So I don't like single stage for that reason, but it's very common. So to me there's a misconception from the client that by going to the single stage you get a competition. What you get is a competition to the lowest common denominator, which is to hide all the costs that are actually going to be in the project, until you get to the stage where it's too late to do anything about it because now you've gone to the lowest cost, which to me is always a bit of a problem. The problem with double stage, is that it's the same as single stage but condensed, because quite often two stages, give me your prelims and an idea of the cost. So you do an idea of the cost, which is again the lowest common denominator, and your prelims are, the subcontractor will do that, the subcontractor will do that, and your prelims are really low. And they go, they've got the lowest prelims, we'll go with them. So you kind of still got the same problem. The only one I would think actually works very well is negotiated, where you put cost to one side and your whole process of procurement strategy is to get your contractors into the room and talk about how you're going to build it. Talk about the methodology, talk about the quality control, talk about those issues which are non-financial, to see who actually has the most interest in the project and understands the project, and then you talk about cost. What's your view on that?
So the problems that you mentioned on the single stage and the two stage, they aren't problems with the process. That's the process being manipulated. So the example of the gutter, the tender query process could be, so if you know that gutter needed to be thicker, if you raise a tender query saying, we believe that the gutter needs to be 3 mil thick, not 0.7 mil, please clarify, if the contract administrator or the QS are doing their job properly, that tender query should be raised with all tendering contractors, and the response should be as well. So if the architect then looks at it and goes, actually, yeah, they're right, the response should be, please, yes, thank you for spotting that, please allow for 7 mil, and then go back to the entire agreement discussion. That drawing needs to be updated, or that tender query needs to go into the contract to say that it's now 7 mil.
Yeah, but that's in an ideal world where I'm quite happy with that. But if I'm in a single stage, and there's, say, 400 metres of gutter, and the difference between doing it correctly and doing it commercially is that I win the job. Why would I want to give the information to the architect, to give it to my competitors, and now I've lost my commercial advantage? And that I see as a problem in single stage.
Well, it depends if the gut size is going up or down. But still, even if they'd over-specified it and you thought it could be something less, when you go into contract, when you're providing something less, in theory there should be an adjustment, there should be a change, there should be, so, those things could be adjusted, but appreciate practical terms could be difficult. The two-stage, again, that's the QS's job to analyse. If you are only competing on prelims and a budget, it's to explain to the client that you shouldn't take too much weight on the budget, because these are all notional budgets, and there could be tactics being played, putting an artificially low budget in, and there should be some equalisation by the QS on that. And in terms of the prelims, there should be, again, equalisation. That if someone said craneage by subcontractor and someone else is allowed for £100,000 worth of craneage, that you need to balance those up, because that's not like for like, it's not apples for apples. And so it requires all the professional team doing their job properly as well.
But isn't that the problem, that most clients, or a lot of clients, don't have QSs administering their procurement strategy, and quite often it's either the architect who is not as conversant with that procurement strategy and the games that people play in construction, and the client always suffers at the end. So where clients and architects are more involved and QSs are less involved, how do you see them overcoming some of these issues?
Well, one of our points was you've got to have the right people in the right roles. That's not to say an architect can't do a great tender analysis, but if it is complex, then you might need the assistance of a QS. But equally, there's lots of architects and contract administrators that can do it perfectly well. It will come down to the individuals and making sure that comparison is correct, because otherwise you can be selecting someone on information that isn't aligned.
It does boil down to time. Taking your analogy there, Peter, when I was setting up the Winchester contract I spoke about during the talk, I walked every contractor around that twice, and we were kicking ideas around, and in the final analysis, part of their presentation to the client, they had to tell us how they were going to build it. Having had the benefit of 2 site visits, we wanted to know how they were going to deliver the job to the fastest program in the most logical and economical sequence. There's lots of ways of addressing it.
Just following on from your point there, I've been involved in past projects where the procurement strategy is a technical presentation and a financial presentation, and there's weighting of 40% here, 60% there, whatever, which sounds great in theory, but then what you find is that it goes so far and then you're looking at the money, and you're going, well, that guy's cheaper. And you find that that strategy suddenly gets thrown out the window, and the weighting changes, depending on what they are. But when the weighting is done correctly, then it works very, very well. And I cited a personal example of Westminster Magistrates Court, where we were not the cheapest. And in terms of technical and understanding the brief and the complications that were there, we put together a presentation which identified all of those issues. And we had Joe Buxton, who was in before us, and had a piece of paper, and he was definitely the cheapest. And the client quite rightly went for the correct approach, which was understanding the project. So I think it can be done, but it comes back to the procurement strategy and the client understanding exactly what it is. And I think that's where the client, unless they're an informed client, is led by the architects, the QSs, the contractor, and the client, if they're lucky, gets a good job. But quite often the client is unlucky, and they suffer at the hands of everybody else in the construction process. How do you see that changing in the future? Because I've talked about this for God knows how many years, and I don't see that it's changing very much.
Well, again, as I've said, it's right people, right roles, and again, and it boils down to the attitude of the clients as well. If they're going to be bullish and arrogant and just think they're going to beat the contractor up during the course of the project and at the end, those days are gone as far as we're concerned. We're mopping up one or two of those that still happen, and we're embroiled in a couple of those presently where we've got a couple of issues with some of our projects where the contractor hasn't performed, sadly. But equally, I recognise exactly what you said with your Westminster analogy, where you've got an informed client that recognises that entry price and exit price do not necessarily correlate, and there is a lot of merit in spending a bit more upfront to get the right price with the right delivery and the right solution for a guaranteed certainty of knowledge how to build the job, and comfort that the entry price and exit price, subject to change of course, are going to be a lot closer than perhaps your Joe Bloggs, who may have been £250,000 behind the mark, and then all of a sudden all these things come out of the woodwork. Well, oh, we missed that, or we didn't envisage that was more complicated, etc., etc. So it's attitudes, it's changing attitudes that we need, and we're seeing it, which will ultimately dictate how jobs are going forward. There's a gentleman at the back who also wants to ask a question.
Yeah, well, just a quick one, I think. We've used RIBA predominantly domestic contract for the last few years. Is you kind of alluding to JCT being more popular, I guess? Would you have a preference between the two?
Certainly our preference is JCT. We did some analysis on the RIBA formal contracts. It's just not as detailed, and there's lots of provisions that JCT has which are very useful that aren't there. We go back to the, how well known it is, how it functions. I think that's the reason. One of the main reasons is familiarity, so people know how to run projects. And go back to the NEC discussion. When I have done NEC projects with contractors that haven't used NEC, or even for the clients, you can find yourself running it like a JCT in any case. So understanding how contract works is important, and JCT does seem to be the most well understood. For very small works, because the RIBA has the sort of the homeowner contract where you don't need as many consultants. It's a good form of contract for low value, simple schemes. But the JCT's also got various different ranges. Got minor works with design. So there are smaller JCT contracts you can use which are simple. But I think each contract used for the right circumstance, really.
And there's a JCT homeowner contract.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Ben and Dave, for that. Obviously, it's quite a vast subject. We've experienced difficulties. I'm sure we all have experienced difficulties with contracts and the kind of minefield that can be. We've personally used Q2 and reached out to Dave, which is how we know, so we can definitely recommend their services. We're going to bring the event to a close, so thank you very much for spending your time with us. We appreciate that. You're pretty busy guys and girls, and that you've got things we're going to. Just want to bring your attention to our podcast that we're doing, which is called Philosophy Informed. There's some blue cards on the table. Please take one. On the back, there's some information about the podcast. It's our way of giving back to the architects in our community. So we'll be featuring different people, different practices to bring to light what makes you as architects tick, to give you a voice to discuss topics and basically just the struggles that you have as well, and makes I think being architects, it's a calling, isn't it? You have a passion for the industry, so it's what makes you your work so fulfilling. So if you'd like to be on that, we've got about 30 architects already signed up to be featured, so there's the contact card, and if there'll be new episodes, so please get in touch if you'd like to be involved or if you'd like to sign up to listen to them. So this is, like I said, it's our first one that we've done. It's a new experience for us, but we want to do this kind of every quarter, so we're looking to do another one at the beginning of October. So we're looking to discuss any other topics, and so as a team we kind of came up with a few topics. One of them was asbestos and toxic waste planning and disposal. Another one, being Oxford, we have issues with planning because of conservation areas and issues of that. And also we've been doing quite a few projects with timber frames, SIPs and NBC, Lee's here from NBC. So we thought that'd be quite an interesting topic. So I don't know if you guys have got anything that you would like to discuss or hear about, but please get in contact with us if you've got any, or even if you want to present. We've had some great presenters today, so if you've got something that expertise or something you'd like to present on, then please get in contact with us. And also we just got it's a QR code if you want to get in touch with us. We've also got some feedback forms on the table and some QR codes on the table for feedback. It's like I say, it's our first one. If we want to make it better, we want to get it right. We had 97 architects signed up, and obviously a lot less than we thought. We'd be really interested in feedback of how we could get those guys. We kind of thought there'd be a drop off a certain amount, but we've obviously had more than we thought. But if you've got any ideas of how we could get people to actually turn up on the days, we have lots signed up, but actually turn up there, then that'd be really helpful for us. And it enables us to kind of improve the whole process and the morning. So finally, just want to say thank you again to Joel and Dave and Ben and for Sam as well for being at the front and presenting. We really appreciate your time. Please give some feedback. It's really important to us. And we've got plenty of food left in the other room. Teas and coffee still available. And just want to wish you a safe journey onwards. And thank you very much for attending. And hope to see you soon.
No. I mean, why else? I can see the game.